Good evening. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles, and the president is asking 2 million federal workers if they want to resign while defending his freeze on trillions of dollars in federal spending. But for now, it looks like a D.C. federal judge might have the final say, at least until the end of the week. There's been a lot of history, a lot of news coming out of the first official press briefing of the Trump White House today, including an update on those drones.
The drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons.
On top of all that, is Trump really trying to get rid of the federal income tax? We're going to dive in.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich foreign nations, we should be tariffing and taxing foreign nations to enrich our citizens. Does that make sense, right?
I'm not sure, but we're going to sit down with a tax expert to find out. And if China's new AI firm Deepseek is disrupting the industry because it costs just $6 million to build, is that going to mean AI is about to get a lot cheaper and less power hungry everywhere? Those are just some of the stories we are following, and there is so much more to unpack tonight. So let's get going, because this is Stay Tuned Now. You remember how President Donald Trump first became best known for saying you're fired? Well, today we were hearing he is sending a memo to nearly all federal workers basically saying, if you want to quit, then sign this letter of resignation and we will pay you out through the end of September. We are told that the caveat is that they have until February 6th to make up their mind. Obviously, the details seem very up in the air, especially with something like 2 million federal employees. But all this would supercharge Trump's massive scaling back of the federal workforce. Now, as Washington and beyond try to process all of that, they're also still trying to figure out, still trying to wrap their heads around another memo that came from a certain three-letter agency with a ton of power that we don't talk about very much. That is the OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget. They sent out this 2-page kind of vague memo to all federal agencies, abruptly freezing all federal funding. So what does that impact? We don't yet know for sure, but today a federal judge put a stay on the freeze until Monday, which hopefully is enough time to get some answers, something that came up during the first official White House press briefing of this new administration.
This is not a blanket pause on federal assistance and grant programs from the Trump administration. If you are receiving individual assistance from the federal government, you will still continue to receive that. However, it is the responsibility of this president and this administration to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Okay, so not a blanket pause, but a pause. Now let's bring in senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake ASAP here. Garrett, first, I mean, this resignation memo, this is coming during a firestorm of budget cuts. How much of this is like a resign or be fired thing versus a thinning of the workforce?
Well, the truth of the matter, Gadi, is it's actually kind of challenging to fire some federal employees. They have a lot of various protections as members of the civil service, which means President Trump can't just come in and clear them out. Here, they come up with a solution they feel is a little bit more elegant, where folks have the opportunity to essentially continue to get paid until September to not do their jobs, and then they presume not be replaced. The Trump administration hopes they can save some money and get rid of some people who don't want to work for Donald Trump administration, who might otherwise just kind of hang on and potentially be problematic. They feel like they can kill two birds with one stone here. Their projection is that they could potentially get 5 to 10% of the federal workforce to take these buyouts. I don't know if that's high or not, but we'll start to see those decisions being made between now and February 6th.
Possibly 5 to 10% of like 2 million people. That's a lot of people. Yeah. Now, looking at the timing here, we saw last night this nebulous memo about the federal funding freeze, and then now this. Does it look like these are timed perfectly one after the other here, or is this just a coincidence of the barrage that we're seeing?
Somewhere in between. I don't think anyone would argue that the way this memo came out overnight was done perfectly. There was a lot of confusion about which parts of the federal government would be targeted, who would not have their money, who would have their funding paused, who would be just fine. The bottom line is they're trying to move quickly on all of this. They understand that the president has a lot of political capital right now. They like this kind of shock and awe mentality where they can come out, have the lead story on every newscast in the country every day. They want to move fast and hope that, when they screw up, it essentially comes out in the wash because the next big thing is already coming the next day. I expect Gadi will have more in this vein tomorrow. They want to remake the federal workforce, and they have to act aggressively if they want to do that sort of quickly.
Meanwhile, they've also got a battle ahead of them. We saw AGs already filing lawsuits about the freeze. Where's all this going to go? And if all of a sudden, your workforce shrinks by 10%, are there enough people to gather discovery at empty offices that are involved in a court case? How is this going to work?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, I think the Trump administration would see the fact that if one of these organizations that's suing them is essentially bled out, that they don't have the energy or the people left to sue effectively, they'd consider that a win. But I do think this could ultimately end up in front of the Supreme Court. I mean, Donald Trump campaigned on the idea that he thinks the idea of impoundment, the idea that the president can ultimately decide not to spend money that Congress has allocated, should be the law of the land. Right now, it's pretty clearly unconstitutional. But the Trump administration believes, or at least many members of it do, that they could get this to the Supreme Court and that a Trump-friendly Supreme Court with 3 justices he appointed might ultimately agree with them. I'm not saying that's why they put out this memo, but if this fight goes all the way to the Supreme Court, I think that's something they'd be perfectly happy about.
Yeah, quite the inverse of the power of the purse there. And then I have to ask this because I have been somewhat obsessed. It seems like after all of the wild twists and turns and the drama out there in Washington, like those drones, we finally got the most anticlimactic of all answers. What the heck happened with that today?
Yeah, such a lame answer. And I know the president was as interested in this as you and I are, Gadi. I mean, he followed this coverage pretty closely. He was asked about it several times during the transition. He asked his National Security Council to study what was going on with all those drones over the East Coast, and this is what they came up with.
After research and study, the drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. Many of these drones were also hobbyists, recreational, and private individuals that enjoy flying drones. This was not the enemy.
Not the enemy, not aliens, not anything particularly interesting other than research drones, and I think a lot of other people getting hyped about the coverage and flying their own UAVs, Gadi. I assume you might have been one of them.
FAA, though, the FAA, we were asking the FAA. The FAA authorized these flights that we were asking about. I'm going to just take a breath, and it's going to be okay. Garrett, hey, thank you so much. And shifting gears a bit out of Washington, but staying with the Trump administration, those large-scale immigration arrests promised during the campaign are happening in some of the biggest cities in the country, and they are expected to continue in Aurora, Colorado on Thursday. Now, sources are telling NBC News that ICE will do these kind of raids in 3 cities a week. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is in New York with more.
Tonight, New York City, at the center of President Trump's escalating crackdown on illegal immigration. Federal agents arresting an alleged ringleader for the notorious Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, who they say is wanted for kidnapping and assault. New Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in body armor overseeing the roundup.
We're getting the dirtbags off these streets.
President Trump last night touting the ongoing arrests.
We are throwing them the hell out of our country. We have no apologies, and we're moving forward very fast.
2 sources familiar with the planning confirmed to NBC News ICE leadership has told agents to increase their arrest of undocumented immigrants to 1,200 to 1,500 per day nationwide. One source calling it a quota, adding agents may be penalized for not meeting it.
Mexico! Mexico!
Across the country, Trump's deportations are sparking both fierce backlash.
There's a real goal here to stoke fear into the American people.
And strong support.
I'm really happy it's happening. Very happy, actually.
After NBC News reported nearly half of undocumented immigrants arrested Sunday had no prior criminal record, besides being in the country illegally, NBC's Peter Alexander asking the White House.
So is violent offenders no longer the predicate for these people to be deported?
If you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal.
The cost of all this can be staggering. 2 sources familiar with the process tell NBC News deporting one migrant runs around $10,500. Here in New York, city officials estimate it costs an average of $352 a night to house asylum seekers.
Are you scared? ¿Tienes miedo?
La verdad, sí.
Catherine Espancha from Venezuela says she and her daughters have stayed at this hotel, a migrant shelter, for 6 months. That could be a price tag to taxpayers of more than $63,000.
And now, 3 sources familiar with the planning tell NBC News that large-scale arrests will happen in 3 U.S. cities per week. Gadi?
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. And that was New York today. Again, those raids are set to play out in big cities and small cities going forward, with the Trump administration saying that the worst go first, and they are focusing heavily on those in the country illegally with violent rap sheets. Now, so far, we haven't seen full numbers differentiating migrants who have criminal histories with those that don't, other than those numbers on Sunday. But ICE officials say that they are planning on hitting Aurora next, that city that Trump spoke a lot about during the campaign after videos showing an apartment being terrorized by alleged members of a Venezuelan gang went viral. Our friend David Noriega is there right now. David, they're saying the worst go first, but also no one gets a free pass if they're found here to be illegally here. What's the situation like in Aurora ahead of a very publicized raid to come?
Yeah, Gadi, so the main thing that I've been doing since I've been here in Aurora is talking to a number of recently arrived Venezuelan immigrants. A lot of these are people who are seeking asylum or have TPS, temporary protected status, some other kind of temporary status here in the United States. And I've been hearing some relatively surprising things from them. First of all, although the presence of the Tren de Aragua gang, the Venezuelan gang here in Aurora, was certainly exaggerated last year, a lot of Venezuelans who have settled here have told me that they do, in fact, have a crime problem, that some of their fellow Venezuelans have been terrorizing them, threatening them, extorting them, harassing them, and that they actually are not opposed to the idea of the Donald Trump administration coming to Aurora and arresting and deporting some of those people. You know, I sat down with 2 colleagues at a barbershop here in Aurora. They're both Venezuelan. They both arrived in the last year or so. And I asked them a couple of things. I asked them, first of all, are you worried? You know, are you worried for yourself with the potential of these big roundups? And also I asked them, what do you think of Donald Trump? I want to play you a little bit of what they said. The interview was in Spanish, but take a look.
O sea, si tú no la debes, no la temes. Claro, por inocentes, por culpables, caemos inocentes. Pero no todos somos culpables. Sí hay personas malas, sí lo hay, de todos los países, no, nada más no es Venezuela, no es Colombia, no es Cuba, no. Hay de todos los países, pero entonces cuando hacen la barriada caen inocentes.
Y me parece bien también que haya ganado Donald Trump, porque este país no es de nosotros los migrantes tampoco, es de los estadounidenses también, y a ellos se les acomodaría también su economía.
So, Gadi, looking ahead over the next, couple of days to whatever kind of federal immigration enforcement actions happen here in Aurora, that is the big question. Will authorities distinguish between people with provable criminal records and people without? As you pointed out, the administration has telegraphed pretty clearly that they're not necessarily interested in making that distinction, but we'll see, how those numbers shake out in the coming days. Gadi?
And David, we've also been watching a lot of what's happening along the border. It looks like there was some sort of shooting there yesterday. And then last night, we saw Donald Trump Jr. seem to kind of float this idea of, I don't know, the potential use of letters of marque and reprisals to go after cartels. I'm not a War of 1812 expert at all here, but what are they talking about with these letters of marque, and how would it work in the modern society?
Yeah, so the idea of using letters of marque and reprisal to go after Mexican organized criminal actors is an idea that has been floating around sort of right-wing intellectual and policy circles for some time. The idea this is a very 18th century, 19th century legal concept that allowed states basically to deputize privateers, pirates literally, to attack, enemy ships and get paid with a cut of whatever loot they recovered in doing so. The idea is that this legal authority could be used to let private military contractors basically go after cartels in Mexico. Now, this is a very, very niche idea, but the larger idea of using some kind of direct military or kinetic force in Mexico to go after cartels is an idea that is actually quite popular in Republican circles, not even sort of, Heritage Foundation, more sort of arcane conservative circles, but in, among Republicans in Congress. And Donald Trump has taken a number of steps that I think can fairly be seen as laying the groundwork for such action, including designating Mexican transnational criminal organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, for me, as someone who, have covered Mexico for many years, one of the big questions looking ahead to the next few months of the Trump administration is, are they going to take that big step, huge step with huge diplomatic implications of taking some kind of direct military action in Mexico? Tons of questions there. What would the scale be? What would the goals be? We don't have the answers to those questions, but there are certainly movements suggesting that it's not out of the cards. Gadi?
I mean, when you're talking about that kinetic action, I mean, there's the kinetic action that would definitely be coming from our government into sovereign land, and let's say it's Mexico, and then there would be privateers, maybe some sort of like special contractors or something that are maybe affiliated with the U.S. government, maybe not. There are two different implications when it comes to the government of Mexico and how they respond. How do you think they might respond to either one of those scenarios?
I mean, look, the Mexican government has been very clear. And again, because this idea of the U.S. exerting some kind of military force on Mexican territory has been around for a while, the Mexican authorities, both under the last president, López Obrador, and the current president, Sheinbaum, have said very clearly that they are a sovereign country and they do not, they are not amenable to the idea of having the United States unilaterally execute any kind of kinetic action on Mexican territory. You're right that if it were some kind of private military contractor versus some kind of U.S. military special force or something like that, there are very different diplomatic implications. If you ask the Heritage Foundation, they say that, the best case scenario as a last resort would be to have some kind of coordinated military action between U.S. and Mexican forces. That obviously would not presumably lead to any kind of diplomatic dust-up. It's such a broad range of possible situations here, all of which are frankly unprecedented, that it's really hard to know exactly how the Mexican government would react. Gadi.
And yet your ability to play out all these different scenarios is incredible. David Noriega, always appreciate talking to you. Thank you so much. And TikTok is back online and maybe finally on the market for an American investor. And if not, the company could face a ban here in the United States. And while another deadline looms, some major companies could be in the running to buy it. NBC News Now anchor Savannah Sellers has the very latest details. Hey there, Savannah.
Hey there, Gadi. So the clock is ticking for TikTok to find an American buyer or investor. And many of those lining up are big names and big companies. The list of potential TikTok buyers continues to grow, with President Trump saying,
"There's a bidding war, that's a good thing."
The latest, tech giant Microsoft.
Is Microsoft in discussion for acquiring TikTok?
I would say yes. You spoke a lot of interest in TikTok.
Microsoft had no comment, but CEO Satya Nadella emerged as a top contender to buy TikTok in 2020 when Mr. Trump initially wanted to ban the app. Other suitors could include tech titan Elon Musk and Oracle founder Larry Ellison.
Are you open to Elon buying TikTok?
I would be if he wanted to buy it. I'd like Larry to buy it, too.
Musk notably has not commented on rumors he'd make a bid. Ellison's Oracle already stores TikTok data. Mr. Trump signing an executive order last week, pausing a ban on the app from taking effect for 75 days, while his administration explores a potential sale or investment, later saying it could happen within 30 days. TikTok's parent company's Chinese ownership sparking national security concerns that China could steal user data or manipulate content. TikTok says that's not true. Those concerns echoing around another Chinese-owned app climbing the charts, Deepseek, an AI chatbot now on the White House's radar.
As for the national security implications, I spoke with NSC this morning. They are looking into what those may be.
Deepseek notes in its privacy policy it collects user keystrokes and stores that information on Chinese servers. So, Gadi, myself and our NBC News team, we've been experimenting with the app a little bit. And I want to give you an example of a concern here when it comes to censorship. When we asked Deepseek about China's Great Firewall, that's their internet censorship and surveillance system in China, the app kind of thought for a minute and then it spit out a lengthy answer. But within just a matter of seconds, that answer disappeared and instead was replaced with a message saying that's out of my scope and asking me to ask about something else. Gadi?
Quite the on second thought there. Savannah Sellers, thank you. And just when the tech world was getting used to the newest AI kid on the block, Deepseek, which we were just talking about, well, Deepseek dropped another free open-sourced AI program. And this one is a text-to-image generator coming from the same Chinese startup that seems to be single-handedly disrupting the AI ecosystem. Check this one out.
The new model is called Janus Pro 7B, and it's multimodal, meaning that it can now generate images.
Here you can see Janus Pro 7B is better than the Lava version.
We've already got the image back from ChatGPT. Like you can see, kind of weird looking cat there, half AI, eating some jammy dodgers. That's what we like to see. Now we've got the image back from Janus Pro. And if we click on full screen over here, you can see that we can see what the image is like.
That thing that is turning heads, though, I mean, how much it costs to pull that off? Deepseek says it does that with a tiny fraction of the budget and the resources of OpenAI. We are talking under $6 million to train and develop the Chinese app, compared to $100 million for the Silicon Valley giant. And beyond those costs, the biggest difference here, Deepseek is completely open sourced. Our next guest has been prophesizing about the power and the need for open and free code in the AI race against China. There's the title from the August edition of The Economist. Keep the code behind AI open, say two entrepreneurs. And joining us now is Ion Stoica. He is one of the authors of that article, a computer science professor at UC Berkeley and the co-founder of Databricks and AnyScale. Welcome, Professor. Thanks for being with us. First off, general thoughts on Deepseek and what we're seeing here today.
I think Deepseek is a very impressive model. I think it has three things. One, it obviously provides best-in-class performance. The second, like you mentioned, it's much cheaper than other models, including proprietary models. And the last one, it's open source. So when you put all this together, it's very impressive and it's disruptive.
And open source, I mean, why should code be publicly available and open to modification by anyone? Something that we saw, you know, one of Meta's models was leaked. It became open source. A lot of people were using that as a basis of their research. Why is open source superior in your view here?
Because open source accelerates the innovation. It's as simple as that. If you consider today how the models are developed in the US, you have pretty much silos. You have OpenAI, you have Anthropic, you have XAI, you have Google. And you have a little bit of diffusion of innovation because people move from one company to another. But again, it's very siloed. And academia, when you are talking about academia, in academia, we do not have enough resources in order to train this kind of models. So then instead of having all your smartest people working on solving and advancing AI, you have just islands of people working and discovering sometimes the same techniques. So it's much less efficient not having the open source models to make rapid advancement in AI. And this is what probably you see a little bit in China, because in China, it's not only Deepseek, which is open source. Alibaba's models, Quan and QW, are open source. We saw another model being released a couple of days ago, also very competitive, called Kimi, also open source. So it's just much faster to do innovation on open source because you have a lot of smart people contributing to these innovations.
And now we have all the people in our closed silos examining this open source. Is everyone going to try to tweak their code to match what Deepseek is doing here? And does that go behind silos, or could we be looking at a lot more open source going forward?
Deepseek, you know, the main contribution, the impressive thing about Deepseek is not necessarily have only one huge idea. There are a lot of ideas which were previously proposed, many of them, but they took them and they make them work. And the way they get these impressive gains is that by compounding effect. You get 50% better by applying these techniques, 50% by applying that techniques, and so forth. And when you compound them, you get 10x or more improvements in efficiency. Now, I do hope that this will push towards a more open source approach in United States, because open source in United States, when it comes to these models, has been a little bit discouraged past years through different regulatory proposals from states or governmentals. So because people are worried that if we are going to develop in US very powerful open source models, other competitors are going to get their hands on, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, look what has happened. It's a little bit ironic. Right.
You know, it's funny. I have to pause our conversation. We'll have another one going forward because we were about to get into open source super intelligence or open source, next level AI, and that's a whole different can of worms. So, Professor Stoika, thank you so much for joining us, and please come back because we definitely need to pick up that conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. And here are some of the other headlines that we're watching tonight. A deadly mass shooting at a grocery store in Indiana yesterday. Police say the shooter killed 2 people before officers killed him. 2 cops were also shot. Now, the victims' names have not been released. The officers are recovering, and right now there is no motive for the shooting. And if you're using Google Maps here in the United States, you might see the Gulf of America on your screen soon. That's because the tech giants say it is ready to update the names of some places to match those on federal maps, but only here in the United States. Now, this follows the executive order signed by President Trump to rename the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America and Mount Denali to Mount McKinley. And in Pennsylvania, a 7th grader says he asked a teacher to change seats and was told, "I do not negotiate with terrorists." That teacher is now on leave. The school district said it had a zero-tolerance policy for hateful and racist speech, but the student's father said he's noticed other red flags in this school district before. And workers at a Whole Foods store in Philadelphia voted to form the first unionized store in the grocery chain since Amazon bought it back in 2017. They're hoping the union could help with their asks for higher wages and safer working conditions. Whole Foods says they're disappointed by the outcome, saying it already offers competitive salaries and good benefits. And an infectious disease expert says bird flu might be spreading by wind-blown bird poop, basically because most of the birds getting sick are the ones hanging out where they do the business, and then the wind picks it up and spreads it far and wide, usually to barns that are not protected from the elements. Don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, hot debate over whether seed oils are harmful to our health. Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health seems to think so. Plus, we'll show you a new video that's at the center of a lawsuit claiming to show what actually caused the deadly Eaton fire in Southern California. That's coming up later this hour. Hey, welcome back. It's that time of the year when we start to get our W-2s, and when you do, you might look at the federal income tax part and just sit there and, I don't know, just think. Well, get ready to hear about this a lot during tax season. Among the countless of other disruptions, President Trump seems to be floating, or at least toying with the idea of getting rid of income taxes and instead funding the U.S. government through tariffs. Take a listen.
Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues.
So can this even happen? Well, Kimberly Clausing is a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics who's written about this very scenario here. Kimberly, thank you for being with us. As I understand it, the income taxes we pay are almost half of the revenue for the federal government, right? So how is this possible? How much would we have to jack up tariffs to make up for all of that? And how much would then be passed on to the consumer down the line?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Income taxes are about half of federal revenue. And if you add in the corporate income tax, you get closer to 60%. If you compare our current tariffs, they're only 2% of federal revenue. So you'd have to jack them way up. We calculate the revenue maximizing tariff rate would be about 50%, which would be a crippling rate that would hurt the economy a lot by hurting the supply chain and hurting our exports. But even at that rate, tariffs would only replace about 30% of what the personal and corporate income taxes bring in. So this just isn't a possible goal.
Yeah, 50% is a far cry from 25%. I know a couple months ago you wrote about this in this very interesting deep dive, and it looks like you're a hard no in this opinion. But what we saw at the top of this show with this resignation memo. Could all of this change if we do actually see the government shrink massively, like in a way that we can't even foresee right now?
Yes, I think that would be optimistic, because if you look at the U.S. government spending, most of it is on things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, interest, things that wouldn't be affected by those kinds of memos. If you look at the discretionary non-defense spending, which is really the area where you could do cuts, that's about 14% of the total. So even if you're very draconian there, which would be hard to do politically, you're really not going to get government small enough to achieve this tariff goal.
Headlines are headlines, and math is what I hear you saying here. Trump does claim that the tariff system did make America rich in the past, at least. Let's take a quick listen to a little bit more of what he said.
The United States in 1870 to 1913, all tariffs, and that was the richest period in the history of the United States, relatively speaking. They set up the Great Tariff Commission of 1887, and this commission had one function: what to do with all the money that we took in.
And so much of his platform, so much of what we see on the campaign and now with him in the White House is about making America great again, and these kind of throws to the past, to history, even if it goes back hundreds of years. How much truth is there to what he's saying, and how different are we than where we were back in the 1900s?
Yes, it's a really tough comparison to make. I think if you looked at any single statistic, every economist and every person really looking at the statistics would conclude that we're much better off today, and we're much better off in the post-World War II era than we were back in the 1800s. If you go back in history, you can find some policymakers of the past who suggested using tariffs. Alexander Hamilton had a nuanced view of specific cases when tariffs could be used in the 1700s. And the McKinley era that he often lauds, including the renaming of the mountain that you referred to earlier on your show, he jacked up tariffs quite a bit prior to this decade of the 1890s. And that tariff hike is something that Trump celebrates. But if you look at the 1890s, it was actually kind of a lousy period in American history. There was a panic in 1893. There was double-digit unemployment in the mid-1890s. So it's hardly an era that I would aspire to for economic policy, or really for taking America back there in the first place.
Yeah, there are nuances in those pages of the history books. And yet, I got to say, like, when I look at my W-2, there is an anger that is also being tapped into here, too. Kimberly Klossing, thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation.
Thanks.
And if you open up your kitchen pantry right now, there is a good chance you're going to find some seed oil. And that is all those things like canola oil, sunflower oil, stuff that's pretty much used in everything. Well, tomorrow, they are going to be one of several topics that could come up at Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Senate confirmation hearing. He's obviously Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. And in the past, he has said that seed oils are unknowingly poisoning Americans. But it's not just him. TikTok is full of those claims, too. So what's the truth here? Can you cook with them? NBC's medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal breaks it all down.
A hot health topic this year. Seed oils, like grapeseed, corn, and canola, mainstays in our diet over the years. But they become controversial, dividing health-conscious communities, nutritionists, and doctors in a way that many experts say is overblown. Some referring to the oils as the hateful eight, concerned about their potential to promote inflammation.
Seed oils are horrible for humans.
Some takes going so viral, they're prompting parodies.
If you ingest any kind of seed oil, you will die within minutes.
But what's not a parody, President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Human and Health Services, RFK Jr., weighing in before the election.
Seed oils are one of the most unhealthy ingredients that we have in foods. And
hyperbolic comments like that, and those of other self-declared health influencers, stoking the flames of the debate. Already, chains like Sweetgreen and Steak and Shake have announced plans to cut seed oils from some or all of their food.
I never thought I should, advertise it.
In California, Carol Roizen and her husband Jonathan opened their first Parakeet Cafe as a healthier option for their family.
How long has your food been seed oil free?
Since we opened 13 years ago.
Now, she says customers across her 12 California locations are lining up for her seed oil-free menu.
Surprisingly, I couldn't find a lot of food offerings that I would feel comfortable feeding my babies.
So you thought, I'm not using it at home, why would I serve it to customers?
Yes, that was my intention.
So why do people think these oils aren't healthy? Well, seed oils are mainly composed of unsaturated fats. Most of them are high in one type, omega-6 fatty acids, and low in another, omega-3. The concern is that higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids may drive up inflammation in the body, which some research supports, and that over time could lead to chronic disease. But experts, like registered dietitian Caroline Susie, say it's not that simple.
There's a lot of negative connotation around omega-6. And I think it's important that we clear up that omega-6 is an essential fatty acid.
While it's true that our bodies convert some omega-6 fatty acids into inflammatory components, the amount of inflammation it's associated with has not been shown to be harmful.
That means our bodies can't make it. We have to consume it in our diet. And it's crucial for a number of things, essential for cellular survival.
In fact, plenty of research actually shows people who eat more omega-6 have lower risks of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer.
Right off the bat, we hear inflammation and we're like, oh my gosh, this is bad and terrible. When in reality, this is a very normal part of our process and how our bodies function and break down foods.
That doesn't mean you should be gulping down seed oils or eating ultra-processed foods that often contain them. They're used a lot because they're cheap. And deep frying foods in any oil, not great for you. RFK Jr.'s advice, to swap the seed oils for beef tallow, would be much more expensive, and it's high in saturated fat, which can lead to health issues as well.
Do you agree that it's not just the seed oils, but it's everything combined, that the seed oils just happen to be there?
Yes, definitely.
A debate reminding us that a balanced diet with moderation is always key. Dr. Akshay Syal, NBC News.
And let's bring in Dr. Akshay Syal. He's with us in the studio. Dr. Syal, let's just start with a recap of that. It seems like you're saying do not chug seed oil, but then you get lost with the Hateful Eight. That's such a terrifying, it's like a Tarantino name. What do we need to know about seed oils here?
So Gadi, great question. The short answer is like our parents used to say, everything in moderation is probably best. But so when we're talking about the Hateful Eight, we're talking about those sort of 8 seed oils we mentioned in the piece there. And really the concern, Gadi, is that those are, you can see on your screen, canola, corn, cottonseed, grapeseed is what I typically use sometimes to sear meats because of that higher smoke point. So, when they're talking about these oils, the concern is that the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, as you just heard, is off. They think there's too much omega-6 in here, which could be a precursor to inflammatory compounds. And really, to summarize what everyone's telling us, these nutritional experts, is that even though they could get converted to pro-inflammatory compounds, it doesn't necessarily mean that the level of inflammation in the body is going to go up. And even if it did rise a little bit, it's not clear that that level that it rises is enough to actually cause any harm.
So moderation.
So moderation.
Meanwhile, tomorrow we've got RFK Jr., the confirmation possibly happening. What are you going to be looking for as a doctor as you watch that?
Yeah, I think a lot of eyes in the medical community are going to be on this. There's the most obvious thing we need to talk about is his stance on vaccines. I think, a lot of the rhetoric we've heard recently is that he's not taking anyone's vaccines away. He does believe vaccines can be safe and effective. But I think a lot of the past statements he's made kind of go contrary to that. So I think rather than hearing, these old video clips that are resurfacing, like, oh my gosh, can you believe he said this? Let's get everything in one room. Let's get, these answers clear cut, because people do change their minds. And I think it'd be helpful to see where he stands. The other big thing we're looking for is his take on processed foods. We saw recently the red dye number 3 was banned, and sort of, he's talked about them being the enemy in our food supply, but what exactly is he going to do to make food healthier?
Yeah, cane sugar, processed foods, oils, and vaccines.
Yeah.
Dr. Akshay Syal, thanks so much for being with us.
Anytime.
Coming up, Kansas is facing the biggest tuberculosis outbreak in modern history. You know, the disease that led to the White Plague in the medieval times. What you should know coming up ahead. But first, you got to see this. Or maybe, actually, you know what? Just close your eyes and listen. How many times have you heard someone say, do not try this at home? Well, last week, a plastic surgeon in Taiwan not only gave himself a vasectomy, he uploaded the procedure onto Instagram, which is entirely too meta, if you ask me. And before you say, I would never watch such a thing, well, 4 million people and counting would disagree. And obviously, all of this raises a bunch of questions. But right now, I've only got 2 questions. Why? And who's holding the camera? We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. A serious health crisis in Kansas right now that seems straight out of 1882. The state is reporting so many tuberculosis cases. They are saying this is the largest in modern U.S. history. And as of tonight, there are a total of 67 active cases around the Kansas City area. That's a far cry from the numbers in the 1800s, but enough to have healthcare workers there on alert. Let's bring in NBC medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, thanks for being with us. Tuberculosis, like how is this spreading?
Yeah, Gadi, so as you mentioned, this is the largest documented TB outbreak in the United States, literally in decades, since the 1950s. And this is the thing about TB. I just want to kind of caution everybody. We'll get into the details, but the risk of just everybody kind of getting it is very low for a lot of different reasons. Number one, it is highly kind of transmissible or contagious if someone's got active kind of pulmonary symptoms. So you want to try to isolate kind of anybody that has respiratory symptoms. But Gadi, this is talk about a community that's on high alert. Kansas City, Kansas, and specifically the counties involved. They've got CDC personnel on the ground. They've got public health officials on the ground. They're doing everything. So we need to take it seriously, but not panic.
And we saw 2 people die from TB in Kansas last year. You're talking about these teams on the grounds, teams that are federally funded. They're on the ground. But how do you stop that contagion?
Yeah, so I've dealt with this before in other cities where I've worked on outbreaks. We haven't seen one of this magnitude, but what this looks like is exactly what's happening in Kansas right now. They're doing free TB testing. They're doing treatment. We even do something called direct observed therapy. So people who get treatment, because here's the good news, there is treatment available and it can be very effective. We actually watch people taking the drugs even outside of isolation just to make sure, because it can take several weeks to months to kind of get rid of the disease. So everything is kind of happening all at the same time. But because of just how quickly this is spreading, and just to be clear, this is something that Kansas health officials have been watching over the last several years. It's just, as you point out, it's accelerating. 2 people have died. So there may need to be more aggressive measures in place. And I think that's where the testing, educating the public, and just reminding people that people who might have thought that this was a disease that's gone, it isn't, and that it still exists, and that we have kind of an outbreak in a specific area right now.
And I should probably know my own medical history better, but like, are we vaccinated against tuberculosis? Is this part of the battery of vaccines that we get and we kind of forget about?
It's not. And I would say that some people, my own parents, did get this. It's called the BCG vaccine. It's actually technically, Gadi, the only TB vaccine currently available. The reason a lot of people might know this is because there's this mark that they get on their arms, at least kind of this spider-like scar. So a lot of us who have parents from kind of the time when this was popular or in other countries have that. But this vaccine is still, unfortunately, kind of only up to about 80% effective, and not necessarily in the United States strains. So the treatment and avoiding close contact with people that have TB, good ventilation, and isolating the illness is actually the best measure right now.
You just described a scar on my arm that my father's arm that I remember very, very well.
Right.
Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much for that information. And there are a lot of other stories happening out west that we're following right now. Some of them include these. DNA evidence has brought an end to a 20-year-old cold case in Utah. In 2005, a father of 2 had been stabbed to death in his home, and that went unsolved until last week when detectives say DNA led to the arrest of a 53-year-old homeless man. He's now been charged with murder. And rapper and actor A$AP Rocky's gun trial continues here in L.A. The rapper is accused of firing a gun at a former friend and bandmate back in 2021. Now, a number of witnesses testified today. A$AP Rocky is pleaded not guilty to 2 felony counts. And while the death toll from the L.A. wildfires is now at 29 people. There is new security footage from a gas station in Altadena that a law firm says shows the start of the Eaton fire. Now, you can see this electrical spark right here, and those Santa Ana winds hitting that area. That law firm is currently suing SoCal Edison, and CAL FIRE says the official cause of that blaze is still under investigation. And by the way, on Thursday night, a massive benefit concert called Fire Aid is going to air right here on NBC News Now. That starts at 10 p.m. And coming up, a Holocaust survivor makes an emotional return to Auschwitz decades after she left the place that ripped her family apart. NBC's Jesse Kirsch joins her as she reflects on her harrowing journey.
What did this place take away from you?
My life, until I got it back. Took my family. It was only 1 year, 13 months, but it took a life away.
Hey, welcome back. Holocaust survivors continue to commemorate 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, sharing stories of extraordinary hope, horror, and salvation. NBC's Jesse Kirsch joined one American survivor as she made her emotional return to the camp for the very first time.
Fog and snow cannot hide the horrors that unfolded here.
There are many things I blocked out completely.
The electrified fences caging people like animals, the starvation, the gas chambers.
What are you feeling right now?
That I can't go in, I don't want to go in, I don't want to see where my family and whole world was killed, my whole world.
This place is a reflection of humanity's worst. But at 94 years old, Ruth Cohen had to return. She was ripped from her home, forced onto cattle cars with her family. She remembers arriving at Auschwitz.
First, my dad went that way with men. My mother went that way with my brother and my little cousins, and we went that way.
This is the last place 14-year-old Ruth saw her mother, her little brother, and 2 young cousins. They were likely immediately gassed.
It's awful, and it's terrible. I didn't know about the gas chambers. I didn't know about the crematoria. Now that I know about it, it hurts even more.
Ruth says she and her sister were sent to this blockhouse. They slept on a wooden plank.
6 of us slept this way. 6 of us slept that way. So there were 12 in one little area.
Was your sister here with you?
Yes.
Did you sleep right next to each other?
Yes.
Every night?
Yes.
Having her there with you, did that help?
I'm sure that it saved my life.
She wants to take a photo here.
You're smiling.
I'm here, and Hitler lost.
Ruth, her sister, and their father were eventually transferred to other concentration camps where they were liberated.
What did this place take away from you?
My life, until I got it back. Took my family. It was only 1 year, 13 months, but it took a life away.
They built a new life in America. Now she wants to make sure history does not repeat itself.
Nobody is remembering what happened.
So Ruth continues to share her story.
I have to be a witness for the world that I went through the horrors. I survived. I made a life. I have children, wonderful children who are going to carry not my legacy, but my history.
She's sharing that history today with her daughter, Barbara, who found her grandmother and namesake in this book of names.
Just so real. I mean, my grandmother's part of me. I have her name.
What would you tell people to do to prevent something like this happening again?
I could say it in one word: love. Love would never permit something like this to happen.
Jesse Kirsch, NBC News, Brzezinko, Poland.
Love. That's a message that you can't ever extinguish. Jesse Kirsch, powerful reporting. Thank you. And let's take a quick look at some other headlines from around the world right now. Tensions in the Democratic Republic of Congo are escalating. Protesters tried to storm several embassy buildings in the capital city today. Now, gates were set on fire and the police shot tear gas into the crowds. That unrest is in response to continued advances by Rwandan-backed rebels in the eastern part of the country. And a giant sinkhole swallowing a truck and its driver just outside of Tokyo, Japan today. That sinkhole is about 32 feet wide. You see it right there, 16 feet deep. It's about the size of a swimming pool. Rescue crews pumped oxygen into the hole to make sure the driver could breathe. The back of the truck was pulled out overnight, but there's been no update on that driver. And another passenger plane incident in South Korea to tell you about. This time, a jet caught fire while preparing for takeoff. All 176 people on board got out, but some passengers were hurt using those emergency slides. No word yet on the cause of the fire. And French leaders are announcing changes coming to the famed Louvre after concerns about the museum's conditions. It even prompted a call from Italy to return the Mona Lisa. Da Vinci's masterpiece will be moved to a new spot during the major renovations. News outlets in France say it could cost more than 800 million euros. One big piece, a new grand entrance, is expected to open in 2031. And before we go, it is time for the future of everything. OpenAI is getting real cushy with the government, launching its own version of the popular ChatGPT just for federal agencies. More on that coming up ahead. And time now for some future of everything headlines. If it wasn't already clear that AI companies are working more and more with the government, well, OpenAI just launched ChatGPT Gov. That is Gov for government, and it is a version of the chatbot specifically designed for U.S. government agencies. Now, it's going to look pretty much like regular ChatGPT, but will be more secure and keep data private. The company says government workers have already been sending millions of ChatGPT messages while on the job. And where will the power come from to fuel the planned U.S. AI data centers? Well, energy giant Chevron has an idea. They are teaming up with two other companies to build natural gas power plants, and those plants will directly power up the data centers. We're talking generating up to 4 gigawatts of power. That's enough for like 3 million homes. The target date for them to be online is the end of 2027. And finally tonight, a big splash being made down in Puerto Rico, all to try and save manatees from extinction. NBC's George Solis shows us the fight for survival in tonight's Stay Wild.
It's a moment more than 5 years in the making. A significant swim that may help ensure the survival of a species. Endangered female manatees, Loisa and Taikaraya, celebrated as they were released back into the waters of the Caribbean. The pair orphaned as calves after getting stranded and separated from their mothers. Nursed back to health by the Caribbean Manatee Conservation Center in Puerto Rico, run by Dr. Antonio Mignucci. Just how exciting was it to be there for their release today?
Signifies a lot to us after 5 years of rehabilitation work, that these animals finally get to touch the salt water again and be able to carry on for the species. What is most important is that they make their own living in the ocean.
The gentle giants, a national mammal of the island, now a healthy 500-plus pounds, and part of a multi-group effort to protect and conserve the species, which has long been threatened by loss of habitat, boat strikes, and infection. There are about 13,000 manatees worldwide, including 500 to 700 in Puerto Rico. Dr. Mignucci says thanks to an army of volunteers, donors, and sponsors, the center has been able to rehabilitate and release 11 manatees. The center will keep tabs on Loisa and Taikaraya for the next year with the help of special radio transmitters as they begin life back in the waters where they belong. George Solis, NBC News.
What an image to end on. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you here tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.